right around Fit 37. Just before Fit 37, around 26, we're at 2688. We're told the dragon comes for a third time. The fierce fire dragon, remembering his feud, rushed on the brave man, hot and bloodthirsty. When he saw the chance, seized him by the neck in his bitter jaws. He was bloodied by his mortal wounds. Blood gushed in waves. Right? And then what happens? The king, in his hour of need, the earl beside him, showed his bravery. This is Beowulf. He showed the noble skill which was his nature. He did not heed that head. Why? Because he just saw the dragon bite Beowulf. And he kind of puts two and two together, not a bright idea. So he struck the foe a little lower down, 2699, so that his sword plunged in, bejeweled and bloody, so that the fire began to subside after it. That's why I said, whatever dragonish anatomy is, he puts out the pilot light. Okay? And the king still had his wits, drew his war dagger, bitter and battle sharp, and he does what? He carves through the worm's midsection. Now, some of us take that to mean he does this and cuts it all the way in two. Okay? Cuts it in half. They felled their foe, their force took his life, and they both together brought him down, etc. So, we talked about Beowulf then, talks like he always does, and he tells Beowulf, despite his wound, 27, 29, that he would what? If he had a son, he would leave everything to him, but he doesn't, okay? So he says, go inside that ancient treasure hoard, 2745 and following, so that I might witness that ancient wealth, those golden goods, might eagerly gaze on the bright precious gems, and I might more gently for that great wealth give up my life and lordship which I've held. It'd make my parting easier if I could see some of what I want for my people. Okay? So, Weston obeys his lord. And he goes into the barrow, we're told. And as he went by the seat, he saw there, triumphant the brave young warrior, many bright jewels. So, here's the burial mound. It's got stone arches, and apparently just outside, it's got a bench. It's got a seat sitting out there. I don't know if the dragon came out in the afternoons and looked at the nice sunset over the ocean or what. But there's some kind of seat outside at the entrance to the barrow. Very strange. Okay? And he goes in, and what's he see? Jewels, treasure galore. Bright jewels, glittering gold scattered on the ground, wonders on the walls. In the lair of that worm, the old Dawnflower, flagons standing, ancient serving vessels without a steward. Why? Because the guy died over 300 years ago or longer. Their trappings all smoldered. We're going to find out, actually, the lay of the last survivor. He put the hoard in the barrow, and that hoard lay there for how long before the dragon comes? We're told the dragon comes, and the dragon lays on the hoard for 300 years. Well, the hoard lay open in the barrow for 700 years. So it's been there 1,000 years by the time Beowulf kills the dragon. So, we're told, 2764, treasure may easily, gold in the ground, give the slip to any one of us. Hide it who will. Or, another translation, or it can get the better of any man. Heed these words, who will. The Old English is uncertain. The translation follows Mitchell and Robinson. Okay? Well, there's a huge difference between the gold will give the slip to any of us, let him hide it at will, and or it can get the better of any man, heed these words who will. Because if it can get the better of any man, heed these words who will, what does that imply about the gold? Any gold. It will be your downfall. And what is Beowulf doing? He's going in there and he's gathering armfuls of gold, aka treasure, and bringing it out for Beowulf to see. Well, if you take the "it will be your downfall" to be applied to this gold, that's kind of setting us up for what's going to happen to Beowulf. Okay? So, likewise, he sees an ensign, all golden, hanging high over the hoard, greatest handwork linked together with skill, a light gleamed from it, so he could see the cave's floor, strange artifacts, no sign of the serpent. Why? Because he's outside and dead. Then in the hoard and the barrow, as I've heard, was looted, the ancient work of giants by one man alone. Well, that's Beowulf, one man alone. Okay? He piles in his arms, cups and plates, whatever he wanted, takes the ensign too, the brightest of beacons. His aged lord's blade, its edge was iron, it earlier harmed the one who was protector of those treasures, that is, the dragon. And so he rushes out. Why does he rush out? Why doesn't he just take his time? Well, Beowulf got bit on the neck by a dragon. Dragons' fangs are poisonous. He's thinking, Beowulf might not be alive. He rushes out. He is burning to know whether, start outed, he would still find alive the prince of the waiters. And he finds him, his life at an end, all bloody. And so what does he do? He began once more to sprinkle water on him until the point of the word escaped from his breast. Something's missing from the manuscript at this point. Okay? Point of a word. That is, until Beowulf, when he's revived by the water, gives a speech. Old, full of grief, he looks on the gold, and he says, "For all these treasures I offer thanks with these words to the eternal Lord, King of glory." That is not the pagan Germanic pantheon. That is not Odin, it's not Thor, it's not the All-Father. Okay? It is God, the Old Testament God at least, or a monotheistic God at the least. So he says, I give thanks to him for what I see here. Why? That I was able to acquire such wealth for my people before my death day. This will make my people what? A little bit better off. Okay? This can be used by them, he is thinking. Now that I've sold my old lifespan for this hoard of treasures, they will attend to the needs of the people. This is like big, massive tax break, he's saying, to the people of the Geats. This will help them out. This will ease their way through life a little bit. I can stay no longer. That is, I've got a journey to take. The brave in battle will build a tomb. Will bid a tomb be built shining over my pyre on the cliffs by the sea. It'll be a monument to my people, tower, and they'll call it Beowulf's Barrow. Okay, so, cool. So he says, they will command. He's commanding. Build this barrow. Notice, this isn't it. Beowulf is saying, not this one. Why? Probably not big enough. Beowulf kind of saying, nope, gotta be bigger than that. The bold-minded nobleman took from his neck a golden circlet and gave it to the thane. He also takes the gold-covered helmet, the ring, and byrnie. These are all essentially, but the circlet around his neck, more so than anything else, these are the signs of kingship. Okay? The byrnie, the coat of mail, for lack of a better word, that he's wearing, this is the thing woven by Wayland the smith. This is a family heirloom. What's he doing? He's passing it on to the last of his family. Okay? And he says, You are the last survivor of our lineage, the Waymundings. It's almost like James Fenimore Cooper's, Last Mohicans, where Chingachgook says to Uncas, you are the last. Actually, it's after Uncas dies. He says, I am the last of the Mohicans, He's gone on to my fathers and I will, etc. Fate has swept away all of my kinsmen, earls and their courage, to their final destiny. I must follow them. The word for fate there is weird. Weird has swept away. What will be, has taken them all away. That was the last word of the old warrior, his final thought before he chose the fire, the hot surging flames. Are those the fire, the hot surging flames that are referred to 175 to 188? That the soul that never expects any change will get thrust into? No. What's the fire and hot surging flames he's talking about? His funeral pyre. Once his spirit leaves, they're going to take his body and they're going to build a big old mound of wood. And they're going to put Beowulf on top of it, torch him. From his breast flew his soul to seek the judgment of the righteous. Not righteous, righteous, 2880. The Old English, where is it? Wait, do I have the right line there? 2820. If I could learn to read. Him of Hradra Yawat, Saul Sechin, soul to seek, Soth Fastra, of the righteous, Dom, judgment. Now, people translate that a whole bunch of different ways. And notice you've got a gloss down there. The judgment of the righteous. Literally the dome, fame of the truth fast. An ambiguous pronouncement. It's not clear whether this means that Beowulf's soul will receive the sort of judgment that a righteous soul ought to receive and so go to heaven, or that it will be judged by those fast in truth and so go to hell as an unbaptized pagan. That's nonsense. That footnote is nonsense. Okay? There are some scholars who have written about Beowulf who read the poem allegorically. And they say, because Beowulf is an unbaptized pagan, guess what? He automatically goes to hell. Why? Because he's unbaptized and he's a pagan. But that would have happened at the beginning of the poem as much as it would have at the end of the poem. Doesn't matter when he would have died. Okay? The lines seem to imply, when it says the Soth Fastra Dome, the judgment of the righteous, that could mean how the righteous are judged and thus go to heaven. It could also mean the judgment of or by those who are righteous. Okay? So the young warrior watches Beowulf die. Likewise, his slayer lay dead. So, everything's even. The coiled serpent could no longer rule his hoard of rings. Edges of iron did him away, etc., etc. No more soaring about in the skies, he fell to earth. And we're told, 2843, Beowulf's share, 42, Beowulf's share of that royal treasure was repaid by his death. Each of them had journeyed to the end of this lone life. And after a while, the other men come out from the woods where they've been hiding. Those 10 weak traitors. Okay, this is our narrator, the poet calling them traitors. And yet, what did Beowulf command them to do? You wait here. I'll go fight the dragon. At no point during the fight with the dragon did Beowulf whistle to him and go, guys, I need help, come. Never did that. Wiglaf spoke to them and said we should go help him. Wiglaf goes in and helps. Okay? Now, 2850, shamefaced, they carried their shield. Well, let's back up. 2848. Those 10 weak traders altogether who had not dared to hoist their spears when their Lord of men needed them most. Duty to Lord, duty to kin, duty to avenge one's Lord. Okay, duty to Lord means you follow your Lord's orders. And yet when they see their Lord being killed, should they have gone in to rescue him like Beowulf did? See, this is where the system presents problems. What did the Rood do in the dream of the Rood? The Rood said, I could have felled them all. I could have slaughtered every single one of them. But I didn't. Why? I was commanded to hold the Lord of hosts. He ordered me. This is what I'm for. Okay? So, they come out, and they kind of sheepishly walk up, and there's Beowulf, apparently sitting on the bench. Okay? Beowulf, kind of in his lap. A foot soldier at his lord's shoulder, tried to rouse him with water, but, he's, come on, Beowulf, wake up. Slapping him. No use. He could not, no matter how much he wanted, keep the life in the body of his captain, nor change any bit of the ruler's decree. 2858, the judgment of God would guide the deeds of every man as it still does today. That's the third or fourth instance where we're told God judges / rules, has in the past, and he still does now. Then that youth was ready with a grim rebuke. And Beowulf spoke, son of Weston. The man who would speak the truth must say that the Lord who gave you those gifts of treasures, the soldiers trapping you standing there, when often on the ale benches he handed out helmets and byrnies to the hall sitters, a lord to his followers, whatever he could find, the finest anywhere, far and near, all that battle dress he absolutely and entirely threw away when war beset him. Now, one way you could read that is he's saying what about Beowulf's ability to read character? He says, Beowulf gave you all that treasure. He threw it away. Why? Because you guys didn't come to his aid. Our nation's king had no need to boast of his comrades in arms. But the ruler of victories, he allowed that he, along with his blade, might avenge himself when he needed your valor. Notice what Beowulf doesn't say there. Beowulf doesn't say that he and me at his right side. No, he says, I can offer him only a little life protection, but began nevertheless to support my kinsmen beyond my own strength, even the worse. Too few supporters thronged around our prince in his great peril. Now, too few here doesn't mean none, because he supported them. Now the getting of treasure, the giving of swords, all the happy joys of your homeland shall end for your race. You guys, exiles. You lose your land, you lose your property, you lose everything. Empty-handed will you go, every man among your tribes, stripped of land rights. When noblemen learn far and wide of your flight, your inglorious deed. Death is better for any earl than a life of dishonor. Okay? Now, that's pretty strong language. So, he orders the battle work to be announced to the camp. Well, who's going to carry it? See, let's say the hall is over here. When Beowulf and his men go off to fight the dragon, they go off with a whole bunch of folks, okay? And they make their way to the whole bunch of folks, and then they set up a camp of some sort, and a lot of people are here. Then Beowulf and the 13 men go on, right? they go on. And then Beowulf stops. The one runs off once he leads them to the barrow. So then we have Beowulf plus the 12. And they stop. We're going to shorten this. And then Beowulf goes on by himself. See the progression? Whole bunch. Not all the geeks, but a sizable number. So that we get smaller and smaller and smaller. We end up with Beowulf, and actually we end up with, when Beowulf fights the dragon, there's Beowulf plus 1. Any parallels here with anything? Kind of. Okay. Night before the crucifixion, Christ goes into the Garden of Gethsemane with the disciples, and then he takes 3 apart with him. Okay. Just like at Mount Tabor, Transfiguration and such. What else? Crucifixion. How many stay with him at the crucifixion?
Only his mother. Except for the the one who he said to look after his mother.
John. John the Beloved.
Whom Jesus loved.
John the Beloved, the one who reclined on his breast at the Last Supper. Okay. So what's this? If this is, did he only have 12 disciples?
No. Well,
no, because earlier in the Gospels, he sends out 70 in groups of 2. Okay, to proclaim the gospel and cast out demons and all that kind of stuff. So, smaller, 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 smaller. So Beowulf now sends word back to where? Back to here. Back to the camp. And I think the implication is kind of, that the camp, these are people maybe looking off at a distance. Maybe like Beowulf and the barrows a mile away or so. And they can just kind of barely see it. So he sends word off. And what does that messenger tell the camp? 2893 or so. He ordered the battle work announced to the camp up by the cliff's edge, where that troop of Earl shield bearers sat sad-minded all the long morning, expecting either the final day of their dear Lord or his homecoming. He who rode up to the cape was not at all silent with his new tidings, but he spoke truly in the hearing of all. So, somebody rides back and tells them apparently what Beowulf has told him to say. Now is the joy giver of the Geatish people, the Lord of the Waiters, laid on his deathbed, holding a place of slaughter by the serpent's deeds. Beside him lies his life enemy, sick with the knife slash. So, notice, the first thing he tells them, Beowulf's dead. He doesn't just stop. Because what might they think at that point? Oh, crap. Now we got to face the dragon by ourselves. No, dragon's dead too. Beowulf, dragon. He could not with his sword make a monstrous beast any kind of wound. Beowulf sits, Weston's offspring. Second time we've been told that now, and within 70 lines or so. Over Beowulf, one earl over the other, now dead. He holds with desperate heart the watch over friend and foe. And then what does the messenger say? Buckle up, folks, because we're in for a wild ride. When this is told, what's the this? Beowulf's dead. When this is told to the Franks and the Frisians, and the fall of our king becomes widespread news. Why? Everybody's going to want a piece of us. Okay, the Franks and the Frisians, if we were looking at that map, Denmark's here. Norway, Sweden, Finland's up here, but Swedes, okay, because the Geats are here at the southern tip of Sweden. So Franks and Frisians over here southwest of the Danes. The Franks are more down this way. So we says we're going to have problems with them. And who else? The Swedes. Why are they going to have problems with the Swedes? Well, if you remember the chart I had up the other day, Onyenthal, his 2 sons, Othra, Onela. Onela kills Othra. Othra's sons run off to Hardred for protection. Onela attacks. Hardred is killed. Angils is killed. Anlin is then given help by Beowulf to go back and kill Onela. Okay? So Anmund becomes king of the Swedes. Well, why is that a problem? Who killed Eadgils? Not Onela personally. Onela's mercenary, Weston. Who's now king of the Geats? Weston's son. See, the feud doesn't die, folks. So, the son of the man who killed my brother is now the king of the Swedes. Strife will be renewed. The strife was begun hard with the Hugas after Hygelac came traveling with his ships to the shores of Frisia, where the Hetwar attacked him in war. In other words, because Hygelac opened a feud with the Frisians, they're going to come back. Nor do I expect any peace or truce, 29:22, from the Swedish nation. It's been well known that Ongentheow ended the life of Hathkin, son of Hrethel and Ravenswood, when in their arrogant pride the Geatish people first sought out the battle Shilvings. Notice, who started the feud?
The Geats.
The Geats. Immediately the ancient father of Otra, old and terrifying, returned the attack. He cut down the sea captain, that is Hathkin, rescued his wife, bereft of her gold, because Hathkin took it from her, whether it's her physical gold or her metaphorical treasure, Onela's mother and Otra's. Okay? So he says, go on to the next bit. The bloody swath of the Swedes and Geats, the slaughter of men, was easily seen, how the folk had stirred up feud between them. That good man, Gloss, Ongentheow, then departed, all desperate, with a small band of kinsmen, sought his stronghold, and Hygelac comes in. Okay, why does Hygelac come in? Well, he's there to avenge the death of his elder brother, Hathkin. Because Ongentheow killed Hathkin in rescuing his wife. So Hygelac gets involved. He kills Ongentheow. This is before the Frisian raid. Okay? Then the pursuit was offered to the Swedish people. The standard of Hygelac overran the place of refuge. After the revelings thronged the enclosure, Ongentheow was killed, skipping a whole bunch. And let's pick up, let's see here. 29.99. That's the feud and the fierce enmity, savage hatred of men that I expect now. When the Swedish people seek us out after they have learned that our Lord has perished, who had once protected his horde and kingdom against all hostility, after the fall of heroes, the valiant Schildings worked for the people's good, and what is more, performed noble deeds. What did Beowulf say one of the times when he stopped on his way to the barrow? What has he done for 50 years? Protected his people. They've not entered into any wars. Why not? Well, because Beowulf is standing there flexing. And all the kings around are like, hell no, I'm not going to fight Beowulf. That's stupid. Okay? So, think about this just from a pragmatic, logistical perspective for a moment. If his men, or if Beowulf and his men have not fought any wars for 50 years, and the men he chose to go with him to fight the dragon, even though they were going to watch him fight the dragon, were his hand-picked cream of the crop, what kind of warriors were these when they haven't had any battles? Inexperienced. Have they had mock battles? Yeah, sure. They would train. Training isn't the real thing.
I mean, not having practice, and then next thing you're up against a big dragon, it's kind of like...
Well, I don't think, as I said, I don't think they didn't practice. I think they trained. I mean, we know from medieval accounts, later medieval accounts, knights and such would regularly train. They train with full armor. Yeah, every now and then somebody got killed. Just like our military, you have live fire training, and guys and girls die in that training sometimes. Okay? But that's not the same thing as going into hostile conflict, where you know the intention of the other person is to kill you. Because when you're in training mode, you know the intention of your opponent is not to kill you. So the messenger says, now we're in deep doo-doo. Because the Swedes are going to come from where? From the north. The Franks and the Frisians are going to come from the south. And where are we? We are stuck between the rock and the hard place. We are the proverbial metal on the anvil, between the anvil and the hammer. Now we must hurry and look upon our people's king and go with him who gave us rings on the way to the pyre. No small part of the hoard shall burn with that brave man, but countless gold treasures grimly purchased and rings, here at last with his own life paid for. Now, Beowulf said, thank you, God, that I got all this treasure for my people, that it will be a boon to my people. And apparently, Beowulf is ordering what? Burn it all. Let no warrior wear treasures for remembrance, nor no fair maiden have a ring ornament around her neck. But sad in mind, stripped of gold, she must walk a foreign path. Exile? Well, Theou, servant of foreigners, servant of exiles. That's what her name means. Not once, but often. Now that leader of our troop has laid aside laughter, his mirth, and joy. Now, what has the messenger just said without saying it emphatically? Why are they, the women especially, going to walk the track of exile?
These aren't going to last long ages first.
Yeah, that's a more elliptical way of saying what I want you to say. Why? Because Beowulf's dead. If Beowulf weren't dead, we wouldn't have to walk the tracks of exile. If Beowulf weren't dead, we wouldn't have to fear the Swedes or the Frisians or the Franks. The only problem is Beowulf eventually would become among the unliving, right? I mean, he ain't eternal. He's not just going to, wind him up and he's going to keep on going. He's got to die sometime. What better way for him to die? No. Thus many a cold morning shall the spear be grasped in frozen fingers, hefted by hands. Nor, why? Why will the spear be grasped in the morning when the fingers are frozen? Because that's when the attack's going to come. Just before daylight. And those frozen fingers are fingers that are cold from sleep. And they're going to reach out and grab that spear. Nor shall the sound of the harp rouse the warriors, but the dark raven, greedy for carrion, shall speak a great deal. Thus that brave speaker was speaking a most unlovely truth. In other words, this is the bitter reality we now have to face. We're all going to die. He did not lie much in words or facts. That's Litotes. He didn't lie at all. Interesting little historical tidbit. Where are the Geats today? Where are the descendants of that tribe, that ethnic group called the Geats? They don't exist. They completely don't exist. Like the old Assyrians, completely don't exist. Modern day Syrians are not Assyrians. Okay? The old Geats, whoever they were, they aren't around anymore as of around 800 or so. I mean, they're just completely wiped off the face of the map. Is it because of this? The troop of warriors arose. They went unhappy to the Cape of Eagles with welling tears to look at that wonder. Notice, this isn't just, people out for a picnic. This is Beowulf's troop of warriors, from which he chooses a smaller group, from which a smaller group. That's why I used, it parallels with Christ and the disciples. And what do? They go and they find Beowulf's body. They also see the dragon. But first they saw an even stranger creature, 38, a loathsome serpent lying on the plain directly across from him, grim with his colors. The fire dragon was, scorched with its flames, 50 feet long. The Old English, 3042, so I can read it right this time. He was 50 fotjamarches, footsteps. Okay, so is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 50 of those? Or is it 1, 2, 3, 50 of those? It's a big difference, right? If it's 50 feet, then it's 50 feet long. If it's 50 paces, then it's about 150 feet long. It's a big difference between a 50-foot dragon and a 150-foot dragon. All right? And so what do they do to the dragon? They take his corpse and push him off into the ocean. But what do they see? 3047. Cups and vessels stood beside him. Plates lay there, precious swords, eaten through with rust, as if in the bosom of the earth they had lain for 1,000 winters. All that inheritance was, now the poet tells us, deeply enchanted. The gold of the ancients was gripped in a spell, so that no man in the world would be able to touch that ring hall unless God himself, the true King of victories, protector of man, granted to whomever he wished to open the hoard, to whatever person seemed proper to him. The power of the pagan spell can be overruled by the will of the one true God. Is that what that means? Or is it the spell has part of the spell is the only person who can open the hoard, take the hoard, is the person God chooses. Was that Beowulf? He killed the dragon horde. He killed the dragon. It's like breaking the lock. So did God say, Beowulf, you can do it? Well, a lot of those critics that I've mentioned before, that kind of people who want to read it from a Christian allegorical perspective, say, nope. He broke into the hoard, therefore he's damned. The spell crashes on Beowulf's head, even though it's not, technically speaking, literally true that Beowulf is the one who goes in the hoard and takes the treasure out. Who does that? Beowulf does that. Okay. Then it was plain that the journey did not profit the one who had wrongfully hidden under a wall that great treasure. That is the dragon, your footnote tells you. Did the dragon hide the treasure? No, the treasure was there before. That guardian, the guardian had slain that one and few others, or that one of a few, a unique man or a man of rare greatness, that is Beowulf. Within that feud was swiftly avenged. It is a wonder to say where a valiant earl should meet the end of his span of life, when he may no longer dwell in the mead hall, a man with his kinsmen. So it was with Beowulf, when he sought the Barrow's guardian and a hostile fight. Even he did not know how his parting from life should come to pass. That is, Beowulf didn't know how this whole thing, death, really happened. What occurred. Since until doomsday, mighty princes had deeply pronounced, when they placed it there, that is, mighty princes, when they put the gold in the ground, they pronounced what? That the man who plundered that place, 3071, would be harried by hostile demons, fast in hellish bonds, grievously tortured, guilty of sins, unless the owner's grace had earlier more readily favored the one eager for gold. 3074, owner's grace. It's definitely owners. Just don't remember that translation before. Okay? So your gloss tells you the Old English. The Old English text is corrupt. Where's that footnote? Yeah. And the precise meaning of this passage is not certain. The present translation tries to incorporate several suggested interpretations. General sense seems to be gold was cursed, only God's special grace would enable anyone to remove it. What this implies about Beowulf's failure, is it a failure? They are able to remove the treasure, and his moral status is less clear. I'm not sure about that footnote. Moreover, if you look at the Old English text, there's only two words that are slightly unclear, where there are brackets for possible emendations. Everything else is clear. So maybe what Liuza means by the text is corrupt means I'm not really sure entirely what the poet meant. So Beowulf speaks. So again, the question, did God allow Beowulf to do this? Beowulf. Often many earls must suffer misery through the will of one man, as we have seen. I think that is a biblical parallel. Just as through one man sin entered the world, often many earls, men, must suffer misery. Why? Because of the will of one man. I mean, that's a paraphrase of Paul in Romans. We could not persuade our dear prince with any counsel that he should not greet that gold guardian. Okay. Shorten that. We could not persuade our dear prince, what? Not to attack the dragon. That's what he's saying. Okay, so what does he mean by that? What lies behind that statement? What did Beowulf and his men try to do?
To resuscitate him?
Nope. They tried to stop him. They tried to persuade Beowulf. Leave the dragon alone. Notice, we could not persuade means we tried. We tried. We did our best. To what? Let him lie there where he long had lain, to inhabit the dwellings until the end of the world. We tried to tell Beowulf, let sleeping dragons lie. Okay? But he wouldn't. Why not? Because he held to his high destiny. What is his high destiny? What's he say when he arrives at the lands of the Danes? Louder?
He's a monster.
I'm a monster killer. This is my destiny. I gotta find monsters. It just wouldn't be fitting for Beowulf to die how? Of old age. Falling apart in bed. Losing his eyesight. Losing his hearing. Losing his bowel control. Dribbling and going, you know. No, he's a hero. He has to go out like Butch and Sundance. Reference probably most of you don't get. Yeah? Okay, yeah.
Well, I had a question. I've actually had this on my mind for a couple of class periods, but it seems to me that whoever wrote this had some cognitive dissonance about it. Because on one hand, this is about personal greatness and strength, and that's an individual perspective. The other is that Hrothgar tells Beowulf specifically you should aim for divine rewards rather than the material.
Choose eternal glory,
yes,
is what he says.
At the same time, Hrothgar is giving Beowulf treasure and swords and all these materialistic things. So I wonder if the author had some dissonance about that. On one hand, he values treasure and sort of materialistic things, but at the same time, he's saying, think about heaven, essentially.
Let's put it this. Okay, I like that. Let me put it this way. You're writing a novel set in the 1930s Mississippi. And part of your novel is you want to wrestle with the issue of racism. Okay? But it's set in 1930s Mississippi. What word are you going to have to use? If the novel is set in 1930s Mississippi, you've got to use the word nigger. You've got to have whites use it regularly. Otherwise, what will not be, quote unquote, true about your novel? It won't be authentic in any way. The poet here has got to have Hrothgar give all kinds of treasure. Why? When is it set? A long time ago. Okay? But the poet who is speaking through the author is also doing what? I think at least. He is offering some words of counsel that might be out of place for that character. So, go back to the novel set in the 1930s Mississippi, you could have, I don't pick a character, you could have a character who says things that are more from like 1990s or 2000 teens in terms of what they mean, even though he would then go, or let's go back even farther. During the slave trade, 1830s or 1850s Mississippi, you can have somebody say something and then in the very next breath, what? Go buy a slave. Disconnect? Yeah. But it's because the author is, one, trying to be, quote unquote, accurate with the time period, and at the same time, trying to get an idea across that says what? The time period is flawed. The way they lived in that time period is flawed. And I think that's what this poet is doing. He's not saying everything is bad and rotten about it. Okay? The poet's partially saying, there's some good in this period. There is some good to Hrothgar and others like him. The notion of valor is not a bad idea. The notion of personal courage or personal honor and integrity, those are good things that can be celebrated no matter the time. Okay?
Depends on the context.
Yeah, and what are we told about Hrothgar? What did he not do? He did not trade in human lives. Okay? He didn't buy and sell slaves. And what else? Nor did he give out the common land. That is the land held by all the people. He doesn't portion that up. But he does say, if this is the land of the Geats and he wants to expand it, yeah, he's going to come take your meat seats. What does that mean? You're all dead. He doesn't have any problem with that. Nor does he have any problem with taking these meat seats. All right? So it's kind of a fluctuating thing. But I think the poet is actually weaving together several different ideas. Because who's the poet speaking to? Well, that depends upon when the poet is composing the poem. If it's an early date, he's speaking to one audience. If it's a later date, he's speaking to an entirely different audience. Let's finish it, and then I'll get back to that. So, what has Beowulf just said? We tried to persuade him not to go after the dragon, but he wouldn't. He wouldn't listen to us. He had to go kill the dragon. So what's happened? And now he's dead. And, to take the words of the messenger, what's going to happen to us?
We're screwed.
We're all going to be dead too. Except for you ladies. You're going to be in the path of exile. Does that mean you're going to run before the battle happens?
No. You're going to get captured.
You are the spoils of war. Yeah. Or maybe, probably not slaves. Spoils of war. You will be given to the warriors. Not, mass rape kind of thing, but wife to a warrior. Okay? Still not necessarily the best option, by any means. So he says the hoard is opened, grimly got. I read this, and this is another one of those things I put on the ANSACS listserv several years ago, and I said, seems to me that Beowulf is calling out Beowulf there. Beowulf is saying, if Beowulf would listen to us, things would be a lot better. And again, you'd think I'd said Beowulf was transvestite or something. I mean, people just went crazy saying, how in the world could Beowulf ever second guess his lord? And I kind of went, well, let's look at the words. Words mean what they mean, even in translation. I mean, we could take them one at a time.
And there's a whole thing where he just burns all the treasures at Beowulf.
Well, yeah, we're going to get to that in just a moment.
But also, but why though? Is it just so that people would take over and own them?
We're going to get to that in a moment, okay? So he says, we could not persuade our dear prince with any counsel, let the dragon lie there where he had long been, inhabit the dwellings until the end of the world. He held to his high destiny. The hoard was open, grimly gotten. That fate was too great, which impelled the king of our people thither. There's that word again. I'm pretty sure. 3085. It's not fate, it's Yivitha. It's like battle, conflict. Okay, it was too great. He says, I was in there, I looked over all the hall's ornaments when a way was open to me. By no means ungently was a journey allowed, and under that earth hall, eager haste, I seized into my hands a great mighty burden, brought it out. He was still conscious. He said many things. He ordered that I greet you. In other words, you could take that to mean that Beowulf says, and Beowulf told me to tell you what I had the messenger tell you. Okay? He also ordered to build this big old barrow, mighty and glorious, since he was of men the most worthy warrior throughout the wide world. So, one more time, let's make haste. Let's seek out that store of cunning gems, the wonder under the wall. I will direct you so that you can inspect them up close, abundant rings, broad gold. Let the beer be ready. Okay? Build the funeral pyre. So, they made the pyre. They brought out all the treasure. And 31:14. Now the flames must devour, the black blaze rise over the ruler of warriors, who often awaited the showers of iron when the storm of arrows hurled from bowstrings, etc., etc. And he summoned the best of the king's things, 7 altogether. Yeah, well, the 10 that were here, they were the best. So let's get 7 of the next best. And what do? They go in under that evil roof. They bring all the treasure out. They push the dragon into the sea. They take Beowulf. They put him on the funeral pyre, line 31:38, hung with battle shields and helmets and bright byrnies as he had bidden. They lay Beowulf on top of it. Then the warriors kindled there on the cliff the greatest of funeral pyres, dark over the flames. The wood smoke rose, the roaring fire, the wind lay still, until it had broken that bone house hot at the heart. With heavy spirits they mourned their despair, the death of their lord. A sorrowful song sang the Gatish woman. The manuscript is damaged throughout this section. Yeah, we don't know if it's a Gatish woman or not. We don't even know who, if anyone, is doing the singing. It might be the sound of the flames singing. Okay? With hair bound up for Beowulf the king, she dreaded the hard days ahead. Why? Because word's going to spread, Beowulf's dead. Anlund's going to come. Then the waiter people wrought for him a barrow on the headland, high, broad, etc. They take the ashes of the flames, they cover him over. In the barrow they placed rings and bright jewels and all the trappings that those reckless men had seized from the hoard before. Reckless. What does that word reckless mean? Wreck, as in reckon. Reckon means to think, to consider. Reckless means to not think, to not consider, to not look at the ramifications. Neathedia, not of mind, or against thought. Well, who are the reckless men who earlier seized from the hoard before? Beowulf and his men. And they did what? They took the treasure out, they burned it with Beowulf, and they put it back in. Notice, they didn't keep it for themselves. The curse seems to be, I'm not saying it is, I'm saying it appears to be. I might be entirely wrong here. The curse might be for those who would take the gold for themselves, to keep, to use. None of these people keep it for themselves. Okay? They put it back in. They let the earth hold the treasure of earls, gold in the ground, where it yet remains just as useless to men as it was before. Now, that is not an idea that people in Beowulf's day would have held. They would have said, gold, well, or people in our day, gold, yes, I'm going to use it. It'll make me rich. The poet is saying to his audience, if gold is what you live for, guess what? What do you end up with? A 6-foot plot of ground. That's all gold will get you. Because where does gold come from? The ground. And you will go to the ground. Just as useless to men as it was before. Why did all the men who the last survivor was the last of die? What were they probably, if we could read into it a little bit, fighting for? Defending their gold. And they all died. A lot of good it did them. Yes?
So is the idea once they get taken over by like the Frisians and the Franks and the Shillings and whatever, that there won't be that gold to have stolen from them? Or is it because the gold is cursed? Or like...
Well, it's not that the Frisians and the Swedes and the Franks are coming after them for the gold. They're coming after them for what?
Because feuds. But like, is it so they won't, when they come in, they won't have that gold to take? Or is it...
Well, the poet kind of implies Beowulf has the gold and stuff put back in the ground for what purpose? Because it didn't do us any good while we were alive. Just it's like, get rid of it, you know. It's dangerous. It's like Frodo's ring. I don't want it. Can you use it? Yeah, you can. Can it be used for quote-unquote good? Well, Frodo's ring, not necessarily. And I think the poet is implying even about what good can gold do? What can gold buy you? Can it buy you more life?
No, but
Nope.
it can buy you food, which can extend your life.
It can buy you food,
people.
but it doesn't. I think the poet, and I think this is because the poet is wrestling with current events. Current his day, not our day. That the poet is saying, you know, folks, gold, wealth, it's not all it's cracked up to be. And here's why I think that. Let's go to the end and then we'll talk about that. So, they put it all on the ground. They ride around the barrow. They sing a dirge. They close up the barrow. And what do they say about Beowulf? Last 3 lines. They said that he was, of all the kings of the world, the mildest of men and the most gentle. Well, I mean, yeah, if you're not a monster. Not very mild and gentle to them. The kindest to his folk. After all, what did he get for his people for 50 years? Peace, prosperity, and the most eager for fame. Lofjeornost is that word. Those same people who read the poem allegorically say, that's it. That's the word really that shows Beowulf is damned. He's most eager for fame. Over everything else, what does he want? He wants glory. Okay, it's possible. There's 2 kinds of glory. There's earthly glory, and there's seek the judgment of the righteous. Well done, thou good and faithful servant, as Paul puts it in the New Testament. That's the judgment of the righteous that, quote-unquote, the Christian is supposed to seek. That's the fame the Christian is supposed to seek. The wanderer says what? Seek the praise of those not yet living. That is, those who come after. Now, that can be read as, we still talk about Washington and Lincoln and Adams, etc. It could be that kind of fame. It could also be what? So-and-so died a good person. For the most part, when Billy Graham died last week, you heard and read positive things. For the most part. There was some bad stuff written, because of private conversations he had with Nixon that were recorded that he didn't know about, that then came out and then he apologized for, etc. Okay? But there were also a lot of people who said, like on the English Department listserv, for example, what a rotten, slimy, scummy piece of flesh this man was, He was all about power. That's why he ministered to presidents, etc., etc. Okay? So, which of the two kind of glories is it? Or is it both? Because in Hrothgar's day, or Beowulf's day, you want to be remembered. You want to be known as a great warrior. Okay? The poet, however, might have something else in mind. Yes?
But with this, I would say, in a way, these are his men saying this about him. That's them saying it, so this is what they may interpret as what he wanted, or that's how they view it. So, when I take, I guess, the most eager for fame, is there a way you can interpret that, at least in this context, that it's not really necessarily something like how we think of it in a current context of fame, like, oh, we're adored by everybody, but in a way it's kind of like his actions in this day, because, he fought all these monsters, and in the end, what did he fight them for? In the end, he's doing it not only because he's a monster killer, but because his actions are saving his people and people in general, because at first when he kills Grendel, these people aren't his people. It's the Danes, and he's not part of the Danes. He kills them and saves all of these people. And then with the dragon, he's like, oh, don't help me, I'm going to do this. And he's still protecting these people who eventually are Italian people. So it may be a flame of just doing what's right.
Yeah, or doing what he is born to do.
Yeah.
He's, as the poet uses, he fulfills his destiny. Okay? Some people are born, apparently, to do certain things. What Jungian psychology would tell us to do is to find the thing you are meant to do, to follow your genius or your daemon, your internal guiding spirit. That thing that says, if you do this, you will be happy. You will be content. It's the old adage. Find what you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life. I'm a woodworker. There's a guy I follow on the internet and stuff. He's British. He has been working wood since he was 15 years old. He started an apprentice program back in the 1960s. And he says, and he's worked 6 days a week, every day, every week of his life from about the age of 15. And he says, I've never worked a day because I've enjoyed every minute of it. And now he's, teaching people around the world through the internet and stuff. Okay? He found this. He knows what this is. Okay? Winston Churchill, with his faults, was born to be Prime Minister of England in 1940. You could take everything before, though everything before that was training for that. Okay? But that's what he was meant to be. I would argue Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Monroe, Madison, Hamilton, they were all born for that purpose. Okay? Beowulf was born to kill monsters within the context of this poem. All right? So, let's look at... So that's how it ends. Loaf can be translated in various ways. It can be glory, fame, reputation, honor, even. Okay? So, seems to me this is where the issue of the dating of the poem is really, really crucial. Because who it's written for, its immediate audience, is kind of more important than us. Because it means one thing to us. Now, Tolkien would say, it is incumbent upon us to try to figure out what it meant to its original audience. So, I think it probably has a later date of composition. I don't know that that means around 1000 AD, but I think it's definitely after the Viking invasions began. Because I think, the way I read the poem, is it's written for two audiences. This poet is speaking to two groups of people simultaneously. That is, two audiences in one room. Well, how can that be?
The hall.
Okay, it is the hall, but where is it? It's not in London, or it's not in Winchester. Okay, Winchester is the seat of power for Wessex. It's where Alfred ruled, for example. Okay, it's not there. It is somewhere, I believe, and a few people have started to suggest this over the last 10 years, also in print. It is somewhere in the Danelaw. Okay, so northeast of a line from about London, if you had a map here, from about London, if you draw a line from London up to about Chester, which is in the northwest Midlands, northeast of that. Why? Because that's where, after Alfred signs the treaty with Guthrum the Dane in 878, that's where Danish power holds sway. So you have Danish chieftains over little, if you want to call them, kind of mini kingdoms, mini tribal areas, M-I-N-I, not M-A-N-Y, okay? So you have a Danish chieftain in a hall, but it doesn't mean the only people in that hall are Danes or Vikings, for another phrase. No, there were Anglo-Saxons there too. These are Anglo-Saxons living under Danish rule and authority. Okay? Especially the later on in the period you go to. Now, 991, I believe I mentioned, was the date of a famous battle called the Battle of Malden. Vikings raided, English force utterly decimated. But England by that time was all English. There was no Danelaw anymore. The Danes by that time had become anglicized. They had been living there for over 100 years, married into English families. Danish Viking warriors married English women, etc. They had Anglo-Danish children, etc., who grew up speaking both Old English and probably some Norse. Okay? So, what's the poem about? Who does the poem celebrate? Does it celebrate Anglo-Saxons?
No.
No. It celebrates the Viking ancestors, Danish ancestors. Okay? And yet it's written not in Old Norse or Old Danish. It's written in Anglo-Saxon. So the people listening to it have got to understand Old English. That's first and foremost. They have to understand it. It cannot be spoken to an entirely Viking audience who only speaks Old Norse. They've got to understand English. Okay? So I think that creates a situation where you've got this dual audience. And the audience is composed of people who are of Viking heritage. They understand Old English. Possibly someone who is a ruler or chieftain or earl, okay, but who also rules over an area or a hall that has Anglo-Saxons in it. Okay? What is one idea that is repeated over and over and over and over again? Things aren't always the way they're going to be. Or they're not always going to be the way they are right now. If you never expect change to happen, guess what? Change will never happen. Does that mean an Anglo-Saxon subject rises up against his Danish overlord? Nope. Why? Because what are we told repeatedly? God was in control of the race of men then as he is now. Now, if it's written mid-9th century, 800s, okay, Christianity has not reached Denmark. The Vikings are pagan. Anglo-Saxon England is Christian. Okay? I think an Anglo-Saxon audience would hear God rules the race of men now as he always has before, would hear that and would say, okay, God's in control. But a Viking audience, or a Danish audience if you want, who is not Christian, would kind of scoff at that. I mean, they might look at those Anglo-Saxons and go, yeah, you pray to your God. Meanwhile, I'm in charge. Okay? And yet what often tends to happen in the poem?
Reversals.
Reverse does come. Now, what might that do for an Anglo-Saxon audience? Those little reversals. Hope. Hope. Word that we saw at the beginning of the poem, and I didn't keep emphasizing it, though it does show up until almost the end of the poem, is Old English frovra. It's that word that gets translated consolation. Hope can be a great consolation. Because what does it tell you? There's tomorrow. Life might be horrible today, but there's always tomorrow. What do Hrothgar and his people come to think, apparently after the first night Grendel comes?
That nothing will ever change.
Nothing will ever change. Beowulf comes and Hrothgar is like, well, mighty God couldn't bring about a change if he wanted to, but for some reason he just damn well doesn't want to. And then Beowulf says, I'll go fight Grendel, and God will decide. But what are we told before that? Beowulf has been favored by God. How? He's got the strength of 30 men in each hand group. Remind you of anybody? Samson. And yet, what kind of judge is Samson in the Old Testament? Is he perfect?
No.
No! He's thoroughly flawed. But how does he end?
By, like, destroying everything.
Way to go, Samson. I mean, he's chained there between the pillars of Dagon and the Philistine temple. And what does he do? Pushes the pillars, the temple collapses. He dies, brings about the end of his enemies, kind of like Beowulf and the dragon. Okay. You can, stronger parallel, Christ on the cross. Look at the Dream of the Rood, same thing.
Carrie.
Okay.
From Stephen King's Carrie.
Okay, that's a leap that I hadn't made before. Yeah. Okay. Okay. But that's not Anglo-Saxon, so we'll stick with Anglo-Saxon. I mean, so the poet, it seems to me, this poet is speaking to an audience and saying, you know what? Life sucks. Our lives stink. Why? Possibly because we have a Danish overlord. And even if it is written later. I mean, Kevin Kiernan, whom I've argued, he suggests it's written during the reign of Canute. 1016 to 1035. Well, who's Canute? He's a Viking. He's Christian, however, but he's a Viking. Who are his ancestors? Hrothgar, and all those guys. Scandinavians. Okay. So he kind of suggests, this could be written then. A couple of other authors in about the last 5 years have suggested that the poem was written in various kind of like many kingdoms of North England from the period about 825, 830 up through 950 or so. even though there is England united under a common king, under that common king, yeah, you do have what are later called dukes, okay, or Anglo-Saxon earls, okay, where they kind of rule over. I mean, think of governors to the president. Governors have their own little fiefdoms, right? And beneath governors, you have what? Mayors, etc. I mean, we still live in a feudal society. We just don't like to think it's feudal anymore. How do we swear our obeisance to our feudal leaders? It's coming up in a little over a month. April 15th. That's how we do our obeisance. We write our taxes. Okay? And they leave us alone. Until there's war and, etc. So this Anglo-Saxon audience might be suffering. I mean, if it's earlier, if it's, early 800s, they might be living during repeated Viking raids. And they might hear this, and they might be thinking to themselves, oh, you wait. Just you wait. Reversal will come. Are they thinking they're going to have a Beowulf who will come kill their monsters? Possibly. Possibly. I mean, the Viking invasions began 793. Alfred doesn't come around till 870. So, almost 100 years they live during Viking raids and depredations. I mean, these are horrible raids. First they attack monasteries, churches, then they start attacking cities, towns, burning the towns, taking the women, killing everybody and everything else, and going back off to Denmark and Norway and such. Then they start coming and staying. So you get chieftains, men in charge of either a ship, a Viking longboat with 100 Vikings, or men in charge of a navy, 5 Viking longboats with 500 Vikings, and they come in and they set up their own little kingdom. Okay? And what do the Anglo-Saxons have to do? Well, the Vikings don't necessarily kill all of them. They subjugate them. They're not turned into slaves, but they do what? What do we see throughout the early part of the poem? You put enough fear into somebody, and what will that person do? Serve you, write you a check, give you tribute, build your hall. And if the people 20 miles away don't, what do? You deprive them of their hall. And you expand your kingdom that way. Okay? So, I mean, when you date this poem, really affects how you interpret it. I would say if the poem is of an early date, 600, 700, then it loses a lot of that additional meaning. Then it's much more literal surface level. And it's also much more fairy tale-ish. Because then the dragon and Grendel, guess what? They're just a dragon and Grendel. If it's later, then the dragon and Grendel can become more symbolic. The dragon, however, is never symbolic, I would argue. Never for Satan. This isn't, I don't think at least, that you can really allegorize this the way some critics really want to do. It doesn't work because there's only a couple mentions of hell, for example, and there's no mentions of any characters of the New Testament. Christ is never mentioned. It's hard to have a Christian allegory when you don't have Christ ever mentioned. Not just alluded to, okay, but mentioned. Okay, we'll stop there. Since we've stopped, we are so far behind. I think I am, and I haven't done this in years, so I've got it right. I think we will do a take-home exam, and I'll post it sometime between now and Thursday, and it'll be due, I don't know, probably like the Thursday after spring break. That way, don't kill yourself over spring break, go off and have fun or whatever, and then kill yourself when you come back. But it does mean for Thursday, we need to start the later Middle Ages, which I don't remember what I've got. Is it Lonval? I think it is Lonval. Marie de France's L'Envoi. So read the introduction after the Norman Conquest, or only a week and a half behind. And read the stuff Marie de France. We'll do all of Marie de France that day. It's just short thing. Probably, I mean, we're going to have to cut some stuff out later. We're going to do Shakespeare sonnets in one day rather than 3. Which means I have to skip a bunch.